Welcome back. In part 1, I presented multiple evidences which make it very doubtful that the commonly held belief that the crucifixion of Jesus Christ happened on April 3rd, 33 AD. Instead, the year was very likely 31 AD. These evidences include that the first figs ripen in Israel near the end of April, that there is a record of Pilate sending a report to Sejanus in Rome, who later was executed in the autumn of 31 AD. Core samples from Israel have been studied which show an earthquake took place near Jerusalem in 31 AD. Comparisons were made between the eclipses in 31 AD and 33 AD, and is quite plain to see that the 31 AD eclipse took place at a time in the evening and in the area which was much more noticeable. And finally, the detail in the narrative which states that Christ died around the 9th hour, which matches the Jewish religious directive to perform the Passover sacrifice at that same time, showing that the Passover was not on a Friday. In part 2, I will present patterns which exist, which directly point to Wednesday, April 25th, 31 AD, as being the year the crucifixion took place. All of these are based on original research and become evident when the recently rediscovered accurate Jewish calendar of the time is used. If you are not familiar with this discovery, please watch my 3-part presentation where this is explained fully. When others present information pointing to a Wednesday crucifixion date, they almost always start from the time cues in the narrative itself. I purposely did not do that. Instead, I presented evidence that most people are not aware of. But now it is time to consider the narrative and what it actually has to say. A plain reading of the text says, surely it had to be Friday. After all, the narratives state that it was the day before the Sabbath. Mark 15:42 says, and when evening had come, since it was the day of preparation, that is, the day before the Sabbath, and it was the day of preparation and the Sabbath was beginning, according to Luke 23:54. And in John 19:31 it says, since it was the day of preparation, and so that the bodies would not remain on the cross on the Sabbath, for that Sabbath was a high day. And then finally, Matthew 28:1, now after the Sabbath, toward the dawn of the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to see the tomb. One of the most well-known aspects of Judaism is that worship occurs on the 7th day of the week, the Sabbath. Since a lot of the passages just quoted mention the Sabbath, it is traditionally assumed that the 7th day of the week is meant. However, this is not necessarily accurate. Most are not aware that the regular feast days throughout the Jewish year are also considered as Sabbaths and follow the same religious customs and restrictions as the weekly Sabbath. This is outlined in Leviticus, admittedly not a very well-read book. In Leviticus, it says, these are the appointed feasts of the Lord that you shall proclaim as holy convocations. They are my appointed feasts. 6 days shall work be done, but on the 7th day is a Sabbath of solemn rest, a holy convocation. You shall do no work. It is a Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwelling places. These are the appointed feasts of the Lord, the holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the time appointed for them. In the 1st month, on the 14th day of the month, at twilight, is the Lord's Passover, and on the 15th day of that same month is the feast of unleavened bread to the Lord. For 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the 1st day you shall have a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. But you shall present a food offering to the Lord for 7 days. On the 7th day is a holy convocation. You shall not do any ordinary work. Although the weekly Sabbath, by definition, always occurs on the same day of the week, the feast days as Sabbaths can occur on any day of the week, not just on the 7th day. Due to the calendar arrangement where the month will start on a different weekday each month, the feast days also occur on different days of the week every year. It must be remembered that the timing is based on the new moon, which results in months having either 29 or 30 days. In addition, the lunar year cycles of 354 days are periodically synchronized with the 365 and a quarter day solar cycles by adding an entirely extra month. Even the words of Jesus should be a very strong indication that a Friday crucifixion is questionable. Many times he indicated that the time period between his death and resurrection would be 3 days, and in Matthew's account he even gets more specific. In Matthew 12:39-40, "An evil and adulterous generation seeks for a sign, but no sign will be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Jesus was referring to the narrative in Jonah where he says, "And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights." This has always been a question of the traditional view of the sequence of events from Friday to Sunday. How can 3 days and 3 nights be counted between those days? Why are the many times that Jesus referred to this specific number of days not taken literally? So many have bent and twisted the text and grammar to try and make it fit Friday. But some Christians of the Middle East did recognize the words of Jesus. There is a fast of Nineveh, celebrated by Eastern Christians. Al-Biruni describes the event in his writings circa 1000 AD. The fast of Nineveh is called from the Syrian town of that name, which is also the town of the prophet Jonah. May God bless him. The name Jonah is a Greek one. According to the Christians, he spent 3 days and 3 nights in a fish's belly, and this is regarded as a sign that Jesus would remain 3 days and 3 nights under the earth. This fast lasts for 3 days. When this was written, the length of this Christian fast, consisting of 3 24-hour days, was still symbolically connected with the burial period of Jesus. Not only are there problems with Friday, but the ubiquitous tradition exists that Jesus was resurrected at dawn on Sunday. However, the narratives very clearly do not state this. In fact, John's narrative specifically states that it was still dark when Mary arrived at the tomb, the open and empty tomb. All the accounts tie dawn on Sunday with the arrival of the women to the tomb, where they found the tomb already empty. For example, in John 20, verse 1, "Now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early, while it was still dark, and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb." In order to determine an accurate timeline that takes into account all of these various details, one more very important detail needs to be mentioned. The Jewish calendar is based on the start of the day happening at sundown. It is evening, then morning, as it states in the very first book of the Bible. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. Genesis 1, verse 5. So there are 3 evening-morning days required. If the crucifixion happened on a Wednesday and he died late afternoon, then he was quickly entombed before the start of the upcoming day at sundown. Thursday, evening morning, Friday, evening morning, Saturday, evening morning, makes up 3 days. He resurrects sometime after sundown, and the tomb is opened during the night before dawn on Sunday. This matches all the various details that have been examined. But what about the year? How can a Wednesday be found in the historical calendar record, especially if for 31 AD, the calendar says Passover occurred on a Monday. I have previously released a 3-part presentation in which I present my research on rediscovering the ancient Jewish calendar which was in use during this time. As I explained, the modern Jewish calendar is a calculated calendar which came into use around 350 AD, several centuries later. During the Temple era, the calendar was based on observation of the new moon for the start of each month, and on the observation of the state of the barley harvest in the state of Abib for the start of the year. I showed mathematical proof that the resulting metonic pattern cycle depends on the particular rules that a calendar uses in order to determine the start of the year. The modern Jewish calendar cannot be used to determine dates during this period. Only the metonic cycle pattern based on the observation gives the proper pattern to use. Using the metonic cycle for the Abib-based calendar, 31 AD would have an extra month added that year. Instead of the year beginning on March 14, an extra month is added in order to give the barley 2 to 3 more weeks of ripening after the spring equinox. The year would have begun on April 12th as Nisan 1. 14 days later, the middle of the month, Passover, or Nisan 14, occurred on April 25th. This was a Wednesday. Only by using this rediscovered calendar and the rules based on observation is this date seen. This date has been hidden from history for centuries. All the evidences that we have examined fit with this day of the week in 31 AD. The first figs would have been ripe at this later point in April. Pilate would have written his letter to Sejanus in Rome before his death in the autumn of this year. The earthquake evidence matches this particular year. The lunar eclipse that occurred later in the evening would have been very visible and would have caused a stir in the population. And the timing of 3 days and 3 nights fits the timeline perfectly. I'd like to show you some further investigations. These have to do with what seem to be significant patterns that exist with dates and years. Look at the particular layout of Nisan during 31 AD, with Passover occurring at the middle of the week, at the middle of the month. Notice that the beginning of the month occurs on a Thursday, the 5th day of the week. It might seem obvious, but realize that if the beginning of the month occurs on any other day of the week, that would also shift the day of Passover onto another day other than Wednesday, the middle of the week. All right, now let's go back to the beginning of the Bible, to the narrative of how the world was made in 6 days. Many people have problems accepting that God created everything in 6 days, as is stated in Genesis. For the sake of argument, let's accept that the text is talking about actual 24-hour days. Reviewing the order of creation, on the first day, light was created. The day started with evening, a period of darkness, followed by daylight, a period of light. The second day consisted of separating the waters above from the waters below with an expanse of sky. The task for the third day was to move the water and raise dry land, forming oceans and continents. The first life in the form of plants appeared. This was on Tuesday. On Wednesday, the sun, moon, and stars and all the rest of the objects in space were made. The text specifically mentions that one of the purposes was to begin to tell time according to their movements. So if this was the beginning of the calendar, and this set the clock for the very first day of the very first month, then the positions of the sun and moon were set in a very specific relationship in order for those cycles to start. That means that the moon began in the new moon phase to signify the start of the month. Now, if the Abib-based calendar rules are to be followed, the new month does not begin exactly at the conjunction of the new moon phase. It begins up to 18 hours later when the moon's first sliver of light could be observed. Even though there was no one on earth to observe it, 18 hours after the conjunction would occur on the following day, Thursday, the 5th day of the week. Thursday would be Nisan 1, the first day of the first month of the calendar. And even though the Passover festival would not be established until millennia later, the 14th of the month occurred on a Wednesday. Is this particular day order of the month somehow significant? Let's move on to the Exodus pattern. And this is the Exodus of the Hebrew people from Egypt. Within the biblical text are specific time cues. Many people consider them just useless details. However, details are always included for a reason. When one charts out the various dates, a very interesting thing becomes evident. The Exodus marks the start of the Jewish calendar. It was the first month of the first year for the new nation. Passover occurred on the 14th of the month. They left Egypt on the next day, the 15th. After a month of travel and hardships, the next date is given. In Exodus 16 verse 1, "And they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Zin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt." The date of this incident takes place on the 15th of the second month. The people had journeyed for a month and were beginning to grumble for lack of food. God tells Moses that he is going to rain bread from heaven and provide meat for food. Moses instructs Aaron to call the people together for a holy assembly, in other words, a Sabbath. The people are informed that the next day, starting at twilight, they would have meat and that in the morning they would have bread. They were to collect food for the following 6 days, but the 7th day was to be a Sabbath. In Exodus 16:22-23, it states, "On the 6th day they gathered twice as much bread, 2 omers each. And when all the leaders of the congregation came and told Moses, he said to them, 'This is what the Lord has commanded. Tomorrow is a day of solemn rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord.'" This means that the 15th and the 22nd, which was 7 days later, were Sabbaths in the second month. From this information, the calendar day order for the first and second months can be worked out. With the days mapped out in this fashion, it is evident that the first Passover occurred on a Wednesday. The beginning of the month occurred on a Thursday 2 weeks before. This day order matches the first month after creation exactly. There does seem to be an important pattern with these significant events. Interestingly, there are records of a Jewish sect who considered the day of Wednesday of such importance that they made sure to celebrate Passover on that day of the week every year. This is recorded in the writings of a Muslim scholar named Al-Biruni circa 1000 AD. He records a Jewish sect called the McGrebes who maintain that the feasts are not legal unless the moon rises in Palestine as a full moon in the night of Wednesday. For God created the 2 great lights on a Wednesday. Likewise, they do not allow Passover to fall on any other day except on Wednesday. And the obligations and rites prescribed for Passover that they do not hold to be necessary, except for those who dwell in the country of the Israelites. It seems that the day order of creation and the day order of the Exodus set up a significant middle-of-the-week day order as a type. Other very significant events in Jewish history happen on this particular day order. It is beyond just coincidence. This is why it is extremely important to determine the accurate timeline for the death of Jesus Christ. The special middle of the week day order is evident in 31 AD and serves to highlight the significance of the event. And to be clear, this day order does not happen in the commonly accepted 33 AD date. Next, let's look at the middle of the weeks of years. The significance of the middle of the week doesn't just seem to be evident in weeks of days. There is evidence that the middle of a group of 7 years, as a week of years, also seems to be significant. The calendar given at the time of the Exodus set up another pattern. This was the ongoing cycle of 7 years, the 7th year being a sabbatical year. Leviticus 25:3-4 says, "For 6 years you shall sow your field, and for 6 years you shall prune your vineyard, and gather in its fruits. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard." Even though it is a very significant part of their religion and culture, the sabbatical year was not always recognized, and it has been forgotten multiple times through the millennia. It is not known for sure just what year it is supposed to be anchored to, but what is certain, the first year of the cycle is the year the Exodus was when it was first instituted. Many people have scoured the various dates in the Bible to put together a cohesive timeline. There have been many scholarly attempts over the years. With better historical and archaeological discoveries, they have gotten increasingly accurate into the modern age. However, when examining the most well-known attempts, it becomes evident that due to the particular bias of the scholar, certain liberties with dating events seem to be all too common. I too have worked out long hours to put together a spreadsheet which combines the biblical time cues and weighing them against the best historical information that I can find. I have endeavored to let the dates fall as they may without inserting any bias. This has led to some further surprising patterns. Let me explain. The current Jewish year number is at roughly 6,000 years. Their year number is said to be an accurate representation of the historical dates found in the Old Testament. Without getting into the details, some of their historical markers do not reflect current archaeological evidence. Still, however, roughly 6,000 years of dates are contained within the Old Testament. There is a very intriguing passage in the New Testament. Peter writes, "But do not overlook this one fact, beloved, that with the Lord 1 day is as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as 1 day." And in the Old Testament, David states, "For 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past." Just as there were 7 days that made up Creation Week, it is assumed that there are 7 1,000-year days that are allotted to human history on Earth. They are broken down into 1,000 years each. If we are at roughly 6,000 years, then 2,000 years ago would be around 4,000 years. Now, it is usually considered that the birth of Jesus is a very significant event, but it can be argued that the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ was a much more highly significant event. Even though it very likely happened in 31 AD in our year numbering system, it would actually be at the end of the 4th 1,000 years of history, but still part of day 4. What is the position of day 4 in a group of 7 days? It is the middle of the week. If you take our year of 31 AD and subtract 4,000 years, and taking into account that there is no year 0, the result is 3970 BC. That is the suggested year of creation. Now, applying the discovery that the start of the very first month occurred on Thursday, and that the rules of beginning a new year, it would occur in April, one can examine the lunar phases for that year. one discovers that the new moon phase occurred on Wednesday, April 13th. Going forward 18 hours for the first sliver of the crescent moon to be visible puts the start of the month, that is Nisan 1, on Thursday, April 14th. Even though the Passover would not be instituted for several millennia, the 14th of the month would occur on Wednesday, April 27th. Now, I do not want to be dogmatic about this, since the further one goes back in time, the more potential inaccuracies can accumulate. But it seems highly significant and coincidental that these calendar relationships just happen to work out. But what about the pattern of sabbatical years? My research shows that the year of the Exodus was 1457 BC. Modern scholarship does not agree with this date. However, my goal is to synchronize the data found in the scriptures themselves. It is very common that the scholarship initially disagrees with the Bible, but after significant archaeological discoveries are made, the Bible eventually turns out to be correct. I do not have time in this presentation to give all the evidences for this date. I will have to leave that for another presentation. The important thing is that the sabbatical year cycle begins in the year of the Exodus. A continuous 7-year pattern is anchored in that year and goes forward and back in time. Going back in time until 3970 BC, the year of creation, one finds that it is also year 1 in the sabbatical year cycle. Is that just another coincidence? But even if 1457 BC doesn't have enough acceptable evidence to place the Exodus, there are other sabbatical year evidences. In Isaiah 37, it is stated that there were back-to-back sabbatical years. The first of those can be dated to 709 BC. In the history of Josephus, he implies that 69 AD was a sabbatical year. With just those two dates, the 7-year cycle can be placed. The resulting pattern does verify that 3970 BC was year 1 in the sabbatical cycle. Going forward from there in time until 31 AD, one finds that this year just happens to be year 4 of the sabbatical cycle. Year 4 as the middle of the week. These coincidences seem to be piling up. The central event in human history of the sacrificial death of Jesus Christ happens right at the end of the 4th 1,000-year era, the middle of the week. It is also the middle of the sabbatical year cycle and the middle of the week of days. And this is within the pattern of a month which has a highly significant day order. Are these really coincidences? If all of this just seems too incredible, I encourage you to verify all this for yourself. These various dates fit together as puzzle pieces, and it can take some time to get familiar with exactly how each piece works together. There is one final evidence left to discuss. This one is almost too incredible to believe, as if everything that I have presented so far already isn't. This particular evidence is based on my original research. I've not come across anyone else that has recognized this particular pattern before. It's something I call eclipse event signs. To state it briefly, there exist clusters of lunar and solar eclipses which occur over a period of years, which happen during various Jewish religious festivals. In the very first year of this cluster, it seems that a very significant event or events occur in the history of the Jewish people. It's not with every cluster of eclipses, however, but it seems highly significant historical events are marked with eclipse event signs. You cannot use this to predict the future, however. These clusters occur somewhat frequently. But if a significant event happens, very often there is a cluster of eclipses that has taken place on religious festivals for several years afterward. It's as if God wants to mark the significant events using the relationships that exist between the sun, moon, and earth. David states in one of his Psalms, "For I said, steadfast love will be built up forever. In the heavens you will establish your faithfulness." That's Psalm 89, verse 2. I'm pretty sure he was not thinking about excuse me. He was not thinking about eclipses marking significant events when he wrote this, but it does seem to apply. This discovery came about in 2009 when I came across a very intriguing related topic. I had missed the excitement that had been generated in the biblical prophecy circles. In 2008, Pastor Mark Biltz discovered a connection between Jewish feast days coinciding with blood moons, or total lunar eclipses. On the surface, it wasn't really a surprising coincidence, since the Jewish festivals are tied to the full moon and the new moon. Lunar eclipses only happen at the full moon, and solar eclipses only happen at the new moon, so this happens relatively frequently. What was uncommon, however, was a tetrad of blood moons. That is, a group of 4 total eclipses in a row that coincided with the festivals. He also found that there were solar eclipses that occurred within this time period that also matched festival dates. Looking through these eclipse records on the NASA website, he found that several tetrads matched significant dates for the Jewish people: the 1948 rebirth of Israel and the 1967 Six-Day War. The next future tetrad, and the last for a long time, would occur in 2014-2015. Initially, as Biltz's information became known, people began to declare that 2008 would be the start of the expected 7-year tribulation period. However, this view quickly died down after nothing biblically significant occurred. There was much mocking and disappointment that resulted. As 2014 approached, there again was an increasing frenzy of debate as to what the significance for the 2014-15 group of tetrads was, and people were attributing it as a sign of the end of the age and offering many outlandish expectations. And it generated many book sales from supposed experts who took advantage of the general ignorance of the topic. The blood moons came and went, and again the mocking and disillusionment continued. However, by then I had a very good idea of the proper way these phenomena should be viewed. Back in 2009, the 20th century matches very much intrigued me. The eclipse data was generated by NASA, since eclipses are very predictable through the interaction of orbital mechanics. The data couldn't be fabricated and modified to fit particular religious notions, and anyone at that time could verify the information for themselves. But the timing of the eclipse matches around the rebirth of Israel bothered me. The lunar tetrad began with the eclipse of April 13th, 1949. This was 1 year after the proclamation of May 15, 1948. If the matching eclipse was supposed to be prophetically significant, then why didn't it match up exactly in the year it happened? Referencing the NASA website, there are actually 2 additional lunar eclipses that fell on the feast days of 1948, April 23rd and October 18th. But they are not blood moons or total lunar eclipses, and therefore they didn't match the system that Biltz had determined, and he didn't include them. Yet the fact that these eclipses exist during that particularly significant year was very intriguing, since God is not just close, but he is always exact. In comparison, the total lunar eclipse tetrad of 1967 begins in the year that the Six-Day War occurred, which then is an exact event timing match. I started searching through the NASA lunar and solar eclipse tables. There are very few tetrads of total eclipses that match the correct days. I then expanded my search for any type of eclipse that would coincide with the Jewish feast days. Sometimes there indeed was a cluster around significant historical dates, but then, checking where the festivals fell in the Jewish calendar for that year, I found that the intercalation pattern didn't allow for those matches to be significant. However, here is the payoff for investigating how the ancient Hebrew calendar was actually determined. If one uses the method of calendar construction based on the Abib state of the winter barley harvest and its particular metonic cycle pattern, suddenly there are many significant eclipse event signs which match historical events of the Jewish people. Eclipses on their own are not significant. Eclipses coinciding with Jewish festivals are not significant. Only those eclipses coinciding with festival days that occur during a significant historical events for the Jewish people are significant. And only the first year of that grouping is the year of significance. I won't go through the entire list of eclipse event signs that I have found. I'll save that for another presentation. However, I'll list some of the significant events which have these clusters associated with them, and two in particular, as you will see. The first is 611 BC, the ending of the Assyrian Empire and the start of the Babylonian Empire's domination of the nation of Judah. Here is 537 BC, the end of the Babylonian domination and the decree of Cyrus, king of Persia, allowing the Jews to return back to their land. Here is 518 BC, the year King Darius proclaimed that the Jewish temple could be rebuilt in Jerusalem. And 444 BC, the year King Artaxerxes proclaimed that the walls of Jerusalem could be rebuilt. And 70 AD, the year the Roman Empire attacked Jerusalem and oversaw the destruction of the temple. There are two other highly significant clusters of eclipses coinciding with important events in Jewish history. They both have to do with the life of Jesus Christ. In 6 BC, there is a cluster of 4 eclipses. There is no other cluster that occurred during this decade. There is a very good indication that this marks the birth of Jesus. And in 31 AD, this marks a very large cluster of eclipses which coincide with the Jewish feasts, 10 eclipses in total. Note that the eclipses start in 31 AD. They include 33 AD, but 31 AD is the year of significance. Again, this all seems very hard to accept at first. It seems very highly coincidental. But the eclipse records exist. It's not tied to any particular religion. The question remains, how many significant events tied to eclipses must be recognized before this relationship is considered to mark historical events with certainty? And some conclusions. Our investigation is coming to a close. It is amazing all the various areas of study that have been explored, and they all point to Wednesday, April 25th, 31 AD, as the date with great significance. But it is a date that has been hidden in the mists of the centuries. Whether this has been by neglect or by design, who can say? We can only speculate. However, my goal has been to uncover and present all the factual evidence that I have uncovered and determined through my own studies. We have seen that the life cycle of the fig tree points to a period in late April for the first ripe figs of the year. The letter of Pilate to Sejanus must have taken place in 31 AD, since Sejanus was executed in October of 31 AD. The earthquake core sample very likely points to a year of 31 AD. The eclipse in 31 AD was much more visible to the population of that area of the world and took place during the night hours. The narrative of the Gospels of the timing of the crucifixion show that the sacrifice directives of the Mishnah were being done for a day other than Friday. The various patterns and relationships between years that exist point to the significance of 31 AD. With the real Jewish calendar based on the barley harvest, this date becomes evident. The 3 days and 3 nights of the sign of Jonah point to a Wednesday date. Then there is the significance of the middle of the week. The special day order of the first month at creation and at the Exodus are matched exactly with the first month day order for 31 AD. The ongoing clock of the sabbatical year cycle also point that it was the middle of the week. And it is highly significant that 31 AD is also within the fourth 1,000-year era of history, the middle of the week. Finally, we have seen that the eclipse event signs of clusters of eclipses which coincide with Jewish festivals have a very large cluster starting at 31 AD. It is one of the highest number of matching eclipses. If there were only 1 or 2 of these evidences that matched this date, it would already be significant. But with all of these many evidences, it becomes hard to ignore that April 25th, 31 AD is a very special year. In fact, it is the most important date in history. I will leave it to others to explain all the many theological concepts. But for those who have always wondered exactly how the tradition of Good Friday can be reconciled with what the Bible narrative plainly states, you now know the real story. But please, don't just take my word for it. Look into these evidences for yourself. Search them out. Verify them. Only then will you be able to truly decide and have this knowledge become real to you as well. If the information in this presentation rings true to you, please share it with others. By going against centuries of established tradition, scholars who are set in their ways, and many people who are not interested in searching out the truth for themselves, it has been very difficult to make these things known to a wider audience. I hope this presentation gets you excited, as you've now seen that so much evidence does exist for this most significant date in history.